In this lesson, we'll complete the full suite of REST actions for the users resource. Let's take a look at a table, just to remind ourselves what that means. You might recall this table of HTTP requests, URIs, actions, and named routes. Just review what we've actually done. So far in this tutorial, we have completed this get /user/1 right here. That's the user profile page. We also have get /user/new and post/users. In particular, we have a custom route called signup path that routes to the new action in the users controller. And then we post to users when the users submit the registration form. In this lesson, we're going to complete the remaining actions. In particular, we're going to make an edit form, which will involve issuing a put request to /user/1. And as we'll see, this will largely parallel user signup. Then we'll also make a page to get all of the users, which means just showing a user index. And finally, we'll learn how to make delete requests to destroy users and eliminate them from the database. Now, as you might imagine, some of these actions will involve adding authorization to our website. So for example, we don't want just any user to be able to edit an arbitrary profile page. We want to restrict that ability to the user himself. We're also going to make a choice about the user index. We're going to say that /users will be accessible only to users who are logged in. And finally, this very dangerous ability to destroy users will be restricted to administrative users, or admins. As usual, we'll get started by checking out a topic branch. Let's see what the status of our application is. All right, we see that there are a couple of changes that haven't been committed yet. This is due to the addendum at the end of the last lesson. We can do a get diff and pipe it to Sublime Text to see the diff. So you can see here are a couple changes that we made at the end of the last lesson. There was this space that got eliminated to line up the widths. And then we also switched over from user path current user to just current user. So let's commit those. All right, now let's make a topic branch. And I find that it's a good idea to run the test suite just to be sure that we're green before we make any changes. Good. Let's start by looking at a mock-up of the edit form that we plan to make. So here we have at the top, update your profile, and then as with the sign up page, we have the name, email, password, and we have just a slight change here. Instead of confirmation, we have confirm password. This is just to emphasize that you don't have to make them exactly the same. And then we've got a different button, which is save changes, and then at the bottom, we have a link to change the gravatar. And of course, this part will be handled by the gravatar website, not by our application. All right, let's take a look at the status of our user pages spec. Here it is. So we've got a test block here for describing signup. And as you might imagine, the test for the edit will be very similar. In fact, we'll have some of the same parallel structure. We'll describe the edit page, and then we'll also describe the actual update. Except in this case, we're a little bit more sophisticated. When we first made the test for the signup page, it was before we knew how to do very much in terms of testing. So in this case, we're actually going to nest the edit page test inside the main edit test. So let's just get started with that. In fact, let's fold this up. So we're going to describe edit, and we'll start by describing the edit page. So you can just read these in a cascading sense, edit page. Now, in order to edit a user, we'll have to have a user. So let's define a user variable. And as before, we're going to use factory girl to create a user. Just to review that, here's the factories file. And let's find the other time we did factory girl.create. So we use factory girl.create in the authentication pages spec here. And we were submitting with valid information. And we also have an example in the user pages spec itself, which is right here. when we view the profile page. All right, let's describe the edit page. We can work an analogy with the sign up page here. The named route for the edit page is edit user path of user. We can see that from the table. You can see here that /user/1/edit is the edit user path of user. So let's visit that page, and then it should have an H1 that says update your profile. And let's just have a title that says edit user. If you want, you could make this include the user's name. Let's run these tests, see where we are. We should be failing. Good. Let's take a look at the user's controller. What we're going to do here is add a new action, which is going to be edit. Let's rerun the test and see if we actually changed anything. Nope. That's because these tests are looking for these h1 and title tags. So that means we need to make the actual edit page, which is going to be edit.html.erb. Let's make a new file and save it. It's going to be in views, users, edit.html.erb, save that. And we can work an analogy with the new page. Take a look at this. You can see we're just going to have the same thing. We're going to have a provide at the top. And then instead of sign up, it's going to be edit user. And then this is going to say update your profile. Good, and now our tests are passing. Looking back at this new page, you can see that we have this top line, and then we have this form. So as you might imagine, the edit form is going to be almost the same. In fact, I'll probably just copy it and make a couple changes. Let's write test for it first. We're going to say first with invalid information. And now we have to decide what we want the behavior to be when we submit with invalid information. Let's take a look at our actual application. Recall that the sign up form returns error messages when the form information is invalid. Let's have that same behavior occur for the edit page. So how did we test before? We tested that with this line here. It should have content error. So let's use that same test down here. We need to click on the button, and the button's going to be called Save Changes. And then we're going to say it should have content error. So I've actually introduced a bug here, and let's see if you can catch it. We're going to find it in just a minute. Let's run these tests. All right, we've got our one failure. You can see that there's nothing to click on this page, which is right, we don't have any form here. So let's just copy this form. So we want a name, email, password, and password confirmation, but for this we have a slightly different mock-up. Save that and rerun the test. This actually should be passing, but it won't. We'll see in a moment why. Oh, actually, there's another mistake. It's not create my account. Now it's save changes. All right, so we still have 3 errors here. Now, if you look at this, it's really confusing. It says that there's nothing with save changes, but we just put that in. And the reason is because we don't actually visit the page here. It says before click button, the visit to the edit user path is here in this describe block, but that doesn't apply to this block. So the way to fix that is just to hoist this up to the other level. And now rerun it. And that's good. So it's still failing, but now it's a different error. So now you can see that the error is undefined method model name for nil class class. You might recall that this is a very common error in Rails. In fact, let's look at it in the browser. /user/1/edit. Whenever you see this kind of error, it's almost always the result of an undefined instance variable, because remember, instance variables are nil initially. So the way to fix that is to go in the user's controller and create an @user variable. Now, in the new template, in this new.html.drb, this @user comes from here, user.new. But in this case, we actually want to pull the user out of the database because the user already exists. Remember, the way to do that is with user.find. And then we need to give it the ID of the user. In fact, it's exactly the same as this up here. It's just what we use in the show page. Just copy that, put it in. That is a little bit of duplication, by the way, and we will eliminate that eventually. So let's save that. Now there's only one failure. Now the problem is that it can't find an update action. So just as new and create work together to create a new user, edit and update work together to update a user. Save that. Still going to fail. See if you can figure out why it failed. We saw the same problem with the create action before. So the problem is that it's looking for a template corresponding to update. And the solution is the same as it was before. We're just going to render back the previous page. Instead of rendering new, we're going to render edit. This will also fail. See if you can figure out why. We saw this before with the create action. So in this case, it failed. Think about it. Think about what this is. We've got an edit template here. We've got an @user, which works fine when we hit the edit page, /user/1/edit. But now we're trying to render back this edit page. Remember, that doesn't actually hit the action. It just renders the template. So we need to replicate the instance variable that we have there. So we need to do the same thing. We have to have user.find params of ID. And now we've finally gotten to a point where it's failing in the way that we want it to fail. Let's take a look at what actually happens in the browser. So what we're doing is we're actually just submitting something blank. And it comes back with nothing. One thing you might notice here is that it's pre-populated the name and the email address. That's because @user already exists in the database. But you may wonder why the errors don't appear, because we did click on Save Changes, and we do have this, this render shared error messages. And the reason is because these error messages, let's take a look at them, make use of this @user.errors. And the only way to get that is to actually try to change the user. So before, in the create action, we got those error messages by calling @user.save. In the case of update, we're going to use the corresponding method, which is to update attributes. So let's do that. Now think about the params here. It's just going to be like this. Instead of user.new params of user, we're going to do user.update attributes params of user. Just looking back here in the browser, we can see here that the user has the right values just from the params hash. So we have if @user.update attributes. Remember, just like save, update attributes returns true if the save succeeds and false otherwise. So what we want to do is handle a successful save here. Actually, it's an update. And then else, we're going to render edit. So at this point, we should be passing. Good. Let's check it in the browser just to double check. There we go. Now, if you think about it, there's actually a mystery here. Looking at this line in new, it's exactly the same as this line. And yet, looking at the table, we see that the two different cases get routed to different places. So when you submit the new page, it should be routed to create, That's because it's a post request. So posting to slash users creates a user. But in this case, we have the edit page, and somehow Rails knows to make a form that puts to the update method. So that's the update action right here. Let's take a look at the source of this in the browser. Let's go down to the form, and we see here that there's this hidden value here. Input name equals underscore method, type hidden value put. And the action is slash user slash one. So how is it possible that Rails knows not to just be posting to slash users? And the answer is that this new template contains a user that's actually new from at user equals user.new, whereas edit involves a user that already exists in the database. So Rails can infer which case we're dealing with because active record objects know if they're new records. Let's take a look at how that works at the console. So if we create a new user and ask it, are you a new user? It will return true. And the way to do that is to say new record question mark. In this case, that's true. On the other hand, we can pull out an existing user. In this case, new record is false. So there is a way to tell just from passing the right message, that is to say calling the right method on an object, whether it's new or not. This doesn't work for general objects, but it works for all active record objects. So that's how Rails is able to construct the right form. In this case, setting the action of the form to be slash user slash one, which as we can see is the right place, right here. And also using this little trick, which you will never have to worry about except for right now, it arranges to issue a put request. Now web browsers can't actually issue put requests natively, but this is how Rails fakes it. It's how Rails makes it look like the browser is issuing a put request. Now if we look at our mockup, there's one more thing we want. Remember at the bottom we want a link to edit the gravatar, so let's put that in. This is an expectation about the page, so it should have a link to the gravatar. We want to call it change, and then the href should be to the gravatar website. So that's going to be at So this is the kind of thing that you could leave off if you want to leave off the href. But this URL is probably pretty stable, and if we commit to using gravatars, it's nice to test that we actually have a working link. All right, let's run these. They should be failing. We can go over here, and we want to add a link. Let's put in the gravatar itself. This is just a raw link. We could use a link to here, but there's really no reason to. By the way, this URL is the kind of thing you just have to look up. You just have to go to Gravatar and say, okay, what's the URL for editing gravatars? And the answer is, as it turns out, gravatar.com/emails. Save that, rerun the test, and then look at our browser. There we go. Now we've got our little change here, and click on that. I'm already signed in to my gravatar. You can see here, example at railstutorial.org is associated with this image, so that's why it shows up here. By the way, you might notice that this actually opened in the same tab. It's a nice little detail to do this. Target equals underscore blank, for reasons that are obscure to me, has a wonderful effect, which is that if you click on change now, we'll actually submit it, then it actually will open in a new tab. Now we got to this page by navigating directly to /user/1/edit and then submitting the form. But of course that's not how we want to do it in general. In fact, you can see that we're not even signed in. So let's start by signing in. And since we'll be using this example user a lot, let's save the password here. So remember that we have this account menu with some links. We have the sign out, which is working, and profile, which is the page we're on now. And then we've got the settings link. So that's what we're going to want to use to edit the user. So right now, if we click on it, it's just this stub you can see here. So let's fix that. This is going to be part of the authentication pages spec. Remember that we have a list of things that should change when someone signs in. So we should have a profile link, we should have a sign out link, we should not have a sign in link. So let's add to this. It should have link settings. And we want that to be at the edit user path. So let's just run these tests here. So you can see that this actually passed, even though it should be failing. And this is a fairly common thing to have happen. In fact, there's a recent discussion thread on an RSpec message board about this. So one of the things about RSpec is that it will take an optional parameter here, and even if it doesn't correspond to anything useful, it will just ignore it. It doesn't raise an error. So what happened here is I actually have a parenthesis. This is have link. And in these previous lines, you can see that the href is inside the parentheses, like this. So what happened here is that we actually need to move this parenthesis out here. It was interpreting it as have link settings, which is true, and then there was this href that RSpec was ignoring. So that's a little wart in RSpec, I think. It would be nice if it raised an error there, or at least a warning. All right, so now we should be failing. Good. Remember, this is in our header. We've got this little stub here. We're going to be filling this one in here too, this users in this lesson. But right now we've got this, which is edit user path. And remember, the current user is just current user. Save that and rerun the tests. Should be passing. Good. So now we can go to this and just refresh the page, account, settings, and there we go. We're already correctly handling invalid submissions here. So our next task is to be able to handle valid submissions. Let's get started by handling a successful edit. We're actually most of the way there here. We've got a name, email, and then a password. So let's just confirm the password. This won't actually do anything because I've just used the same password. But of course, if you wanted to change your password, this is how you do it. Let's see if we can predict what's going to happen. Let's take a look here at the user's controller. So what do we have right now? We've got a user.find, and then we actually have a user.update attribute. So this is actually going to work. It's going to update the attributes of the user in the database. See if you can predict what will happen, though. It's not quite going to work. Right, so what happened here is that in this branch, which is what gets invoked when this is true, that's to say when the update succeeds, this just falls off the end of the method. And what Rails is trying to do is render a template or a view corresponding to update. But of course there is no such template. What we want to do is the same kind of thing we did up here with create, and that is to redirect somewhere. So let's write a test for that. So here we could put in the user's current name, but of course we want to be able to test the ability to change that. So let's put in a local variable, just a new name. Let's be a little bit literal here. And let's also put in a new email address. And then let's fill in the name with the new name and email. The new email. Oops, I have new email here. Of course, we can change the password too, but we're not going to test for that. Just use the current user's password. This user is from up here. And we forgot the widths here. Let's put those in. Well, let's just do one more. There we go. So let's just verify that it goes back to the profile page. We'll do that by testing for the presence of the new name in the title. So this is actually verifying that the update worked along with the correct redirect. So let's run this. Okay, so let's redirect. This is one situation where the syntax highlighting actually tells us that there's something wrong. So you can see that up here it's red and down here it's white. It's because it's misspelled. There we go. We run the test and we should be green. Oops, we're still red. Oh, and the reason is because we didn't click the button here. Now it should be green. Good. Go back to the browser, just reload this, and there we go. Now, there's one thing you might notice here that's a little bit disappointing, if you think about it. Notice that we actually have the sign in link again. So see if you can figure out why that is. Remember that we're finding users, the sessions helper, like this, user.findByRememberToken. But the remember token, if you'll recall, changes every time we save the user. Now, one way to avoid this problem would be to change this before save to a before create. And now the remember token is permanent. It's created once and then never changes. But of course, that's a potential security problem, because if someone ever manages to get the cookie by hijacking the session, then they'll always be able to log in as the user. So it's nice to invalidate the cookie whenever the user updates his information. As a side effect of this, though, because the cookie is changed, the user is no longer signed in. So what we need to do in here is actually sign in the user after updating attributes. So we'll test for that by making sure that the sign out link still appears. So this should fail. We need to put in a sign in right here. This is just like in here. Great, so now it works. And we're also going to put in just a little flash success here. Ready to test for that. It's going to be a success, as in this case. So let's just put flash success. And let's just say profile updated. So we've implicitly tested the change in the name right here, but I want to be a little bit more explicit about that. So I actually want to verify that the user in the database has a new name and a new email. And there's a nice slick way to do this. We can call the reload method on the user to pull the information from the database. So we want something like this. And same for email. But inside of this user pages spec, the subject is the page. Remember, we've got subject page up here. And there's a way to change that. We've seen this before with specify. Saw it briefly in the user model. So this is the test for the user model, and we can change the subject by using the specify method. So we can go down here and say specify and the same thing for email. Let's run these. These should pass. So let's go back to the browser and just double check this. I'm going to reload. So we're still signed out because we updated the user before we put in this extra step, this sign in. So we have to sign back in. Now we can go to settings. Change this to foo bar and save the changes. Oh, I need to put in the password confirmation. And there we go. Profile updated. And if we refresh, it should disappear. Good. Now, even though this user stays signed in when updating his information, there's still a problem, which is that you don't have to be signed in to visit that page. So here the user isn't signed in, but not only can anybody visit this page, but anybody can update it. So that signed the user in, but it's not currently necessary. So in this section, we're going to add a couple of layers of authorization. We're first going to require that the user be signed in to hit the edit page. And then we're going to enforce the constraint that users can only edit themselves. Let's take a quick look at a mock-up to see the kind of behavior we want. Alright, if a non-signed-in user tries to access the edit page, he should be redirected to the sign-in page with a message that says, please sign in to access this page. So this is going to go in our authentication specs. It's going to be a new section on authorization. And let's describe the behavior we expect for non-signed-in users. Now, by putting these tests in the authentication pages spec, instead of in the spec associated with a particular controller, we're going to be able to define essentially our full security model in one file. So that's a convenient thing to have for an application of this size. But of course, we do need to break things down by controller in some way, so let's describe the user's controller. So this is for non-signed-in users in the user's controller. This is going to be visiting the edit page. So non-signed-in users, when visiting the edit page, should be redirected to sign in. And I'm going to add a test for the flash message. Let's go over here and remind ourselves how this works. This is in the application layout. So we have a content tag with a div and then classes equal to alert and then alert dash whatever the key is. So far we've had a success key and an error key. This is going to introduce a third of the three, which is what's called the notice key. And as with the other two, the notice key will be styled automatically by Bootstrap. Let's run these tests. They should be failing. Good, we've got 2 failures. So let's go in the user's controller and enforce this constraint. Alright, the way we're going to do this is with what's called a before filter. So a before filter runs by default before any of the actions in the controller. So what you do is you give the before filter a symbol, which is the name of the before filter. So in this case, I'm going to have a before filter called signed in user. And then we're going to have a method here at the end. Corresponding to that before filter. Signed in user. And then what we're going to do here is redirect to the sign-in path. Unless signed in. Remember, we have the signed in helper. Here, signed in is true if the user is signed in and false otherwise. So let's actually just test this one line here. This is Shift Command R. So we're missing a user. I actually noticed that and then I forgot. Let's create a user there, and now I'm just rerunning the same test. Alright, so we have one passing test. Let's do this Shift Command R right here. Okay, so this is passing. So that means if we try to hit that page, we're actually being redirected. Let's go to /user/1/edit. All right, so it's redirecting us, but we don't have that nice flash. Let's have the notice say, please sign in. Now let's run the test. Let's run all the tests in this file. All right, so it's passing, which means if we try this again, there we go. So now we've got this flash message. There's actually a shortcut for this. Now that we've got this working, we can refactor a little. We can add a hash with the message. So this automatically puts it in the flash. So you can say redirect to sign-in path, notice, please sign in. If you think about it, this line was actually being executed even if the user was signed in. Let's rerun our full test suite to see what's going on. Alright, so you might have thought we'd be green there, but in fact we're quite red. And the reason is because this before filter is currently executing on all of these pages. But of course, currently users are signed in only a couple places. In fact, it might just be one place. Users are signed in after they sign up with valid information. This is right here. And there's probably one spot in here. Yeah, there's another sign in with valid information here. But all these other tests are failing because this before filter is protecting every page in this controller. So we only want the edit page to be protected right now. So what we can do is give it a hash and say only, and then we have an array of actions. And now the only things failing are the edit specs. So let's go back to that. So you'll notice here that we're describing editing, and in order to have this work, we actually need to be signed in. But if you look at this, the user isn't signed in at this point. Of course, that was a problem with our application, but now we have a problem in our test because we need to sign a user in somewhere here. So the way we're going to do that is to create a utility that signs users in. Let's go over here to our utilities file. Let's define a sign-in method. We'll take in a user, and then it will actually sign the user in. And unfortunately, we actually have to do this two ways. There's the capybara way, which we've seen before. And here, we can sign in by filling in the email and password fields with valid information and then clicking the button. In fact, it's going to be exactly the same right here. I'm just going to copy that. But unfortunately, there are going to be some times where we're not going to be using capybara. So I'll defer that just a moment, but this will work for now. In fact, we can replace this here, this before block, with sign in, user, get rid of that. And then we also need to sign in before editing the user. So we'll get that to work by changing this to a multi-line block. We'll visit the edit user path, but first we need to sign in as the user. And now let's rerun the full test suite. Oops, we need to save this file too. Although the user pages spec is where the failures are. So it's saying that there's failure sign in user, no method error. And that's because we need to reload the utilities. Spork, so let's do that. And now it should pass. Nope, still failing. Nope, and that's because we're missing the first step. We actually need to visit the sign-in path. Alright, let's take a look at this. Let's run these guys, and I think these were the only ones failing. Nope, still failing. Oh, right, it's the same problem. We're editing the utilities. Usually Spork is great, but in these rare occasions where you're doing lots of work in the utilities file or in the routes, it can be kind of a pain. There we go. Now the whole suite should be green. Excellent. Even though things seem to be working now and we seem to have a working authorization model, there's actually still a problem. So if you look at the user's controller, we definitely want to restrict access to this edit, but the problem is we also want to restrict access to update. Now, of course, you can't get to the update method directly by navigating through web pages. This only happens when you submit an edit form, which issues a put request to the update action. That's this line here. Now, currently, the only way we know how to issue put requests is to submit an edit form, like this. But it is possible for sophisticated attackers to issue put requests directly to the update action. And the way you would do that is to use, for example, a command line tool such as curl. So a command line tool like curl can issue put requests directly, which means that we need to protect this update action as well. Now, we could do that just by putting this in here, but it would be really nice to have a test for this fact as well. Especially when you're considering security, I think it's really important to have tests. So let's figure out how to do that. We have a problem. Right now we only know how to visit pages. But in this case, the update action doesn't correspond to a page. What we need to be able to do is issue a request directly to the update action. So let's put in a describe block. So let's think about what we want the response to be. Right now the subject is the page, but we want to change the subject using specify. Now when you issue requests directly to Rails actions, you end up with an object called response. And you can test if this response is a redirect to the right place. In this case, to the sign-in path. So in this line, we need to issue a request directly, and there's an intuitive way to do this. There are actually 4 methods available inside of these tests. There's get, post, put, and delete, corresponding to the 4 standard HTTP requests. We've got get, post, put, and delete. In this case, in order to get routed to the update action in the user's controller, we need to use the put method. So before, we're going to issue a put request to the user path of the user. Right? That's what this is here. This is putting user path of 1, and remember we can just use the whole user in place of 1. So let's run this to see what happens. Just run this one test. And then we can get it to pass by adding update to this list of actions protected by this before filter. Let's save it. And there we go. Let's rerun the whole suite just to be careful. Good. So now we know how to require signed-in users for particular pages on the site. But of course, in this case, that's not quite good enough. What we really want is for the user only to be able to edit his own profile. So for example, if we were to create a second user, go over here, sign out, sign up. This user can go to /users/1/edit. So we want some rule in our application to prevent this. Let's express that expectation here. So this is going to be a describe block not for non-signed-in users, but for the wrong user. Let's have a user and the wrong user. And in this case, in order to make a second user, we need a second email address. And before doing anything, we need to sign in as that wrong user. Actually, let's sign in as the first user and then visit the wrong users page. Okay, so let's describe visiting the user's edit page. So here I'm using this notation with the name of the controller and then the name of the action separated by this hash sign. So let's visit the edit page of the wrong user. And it should not have a title that says edit user. In other words, it should not be the edit page. Now, you might be tempted at this point to say that it should have a selector title sign in, but we're not actually going to redirect to the sign in page. See if you can figure out why while we implement this. Let's save this and let's just run this test. We'll run the whole suite. That's the whole file. So we've got one failure, which is right. So let's get that to work. Need to put in another before filter. We're going to call this filter correct user. So we'll start with edit. Of course, we need to protect update in exactly the same way. So how are we going to test this correct user? So let's think about what's going on here. Someone tries to go to the edit page of a different user, so that means that they're going to be routed here. But before they even hit this action, we need to verify that the user here, this @user, is the same as the user who's currently logged in. Remember, there definitely will be a user currently logged in because of this first before filter. So it's going to look something like this. I'm going to redirect somewhere. Now, this is the kind of thing that you really should never have happen. Right? Anybody doing this is trying to do something unauthorized. It's not like trying to go to an edit page and then just having to sign in. This is actually potentially malicious. So what we're going to do is redirect to the root path. And there's not going to be any notice at all. This is just going to be saying, effectively, we're just going to ignore what you tried to do. So we're going to use a Boolean, current user question mark, that's going to return true if @user is the current user and false otherwise. But if you look at this, you might realize that we actually don't have the @user variable, because what happens is this before filter executes before, by design, this action. So what we can do is just take this and cut it and then stick it in here. The reason we could cut it is because this @user is available anywhere in this class. So if the current user is the @user, then the before filter will not redirect, and instead it will just go to the edit action. In order to get this to work, we need to define this current user Boolean. If you look at the design, it takes in a user. Let's just put this over here. So it takes in a user variable, so let's just give it an argument. And then what we want to make sure is this user is the same as the current user. We can do that with the double equals comparison operator. Right, and save that and rerun the test. Look at that. You can look in the browser. You can see it just got redirected to the root path. Now remember, there's this problem that we can issue requests directly to the update action, as we saw here, using this put request, so we need to take that into account as well. So it's the same basic idea. We're going to submit put request to essentially /user/1. That's the user path of the user. In fact, in this case, it's the same thing as we have here. It's edit user path of wrong user. This is going to be user path of wrong user. And then we're going to make the same specification, essentially, except instead of a redirect to the sign-in path, we're going to redirect to the root path. Let's run these tests. We should have one failure again. There we go. And just as with the signed-in user before filter, we can add update here. Rerun the test, and we should be green now. Oops, we're still red. You see the problem here is that it's redirecting to the sign-in path instead of the root path. This is an excellent debugging exercise. As you might suspect, the problem is that this request is getting caught by the signed-in user before filter, which is in fact redirecting to the sign-in path. Let's verify that. This is one of my favorite debugging techniques. I'm going to raise an exception here in the test. In particular, I'm going to raise signedin.inspect. This will allow me to look at what this signed-in method is. Let's rerun that test. And so you can see there's a runtime error, which is what happens when you just raise a generic exception like this, and it says false. So in fact, signed in is false, which is what we suspected. But that just raises the question of why, because right here we have before sign in user. So why isn't that working? I actually alluded to the answer briefly before. It's because if we're using Capybara, this utility works just fine. We can visit the sign-in path, fill in the email and password, and then click the sign-in button. But this here, this submitting a put request directly to the user's update action, doesn't use Capybara, which means that this sign-in actually isn't working. Now I actually find this somewhat confusing because even if this doesn't use Capybara, I would still expect this to be able to use it. But in fact, that's not how it works. And the way to fix this is to push down one level of abstraction. If you recall from our sessions helper, we're actually signing in users by setting this remember token. Now unfortunately, you can't actually call cookies.permanent in a test, but you can access the cookies object. And for the purposes of this test, we don't really care if it's permanent or not. So what we're going to do here is at the end of this sign-in method, this little helper, we're going to set the remember token explicitly. Since this is confusing, potentially, I'm going to add a comment saying why we're doing this. So we're going to set the cookies of the remember token equal to the user's remember token. So we've got a user right here. We can just say user.remember token. All right, that involved a change to the utility, so we'll have to restart Spork. By the way, you can really see when just running one example at a time what a big difference Spork makes. We can run it without Spork. This is Shift Command R. You can see we have to wait. So even though Spork is kind of annoying in this case because of this necessity of reloading the utilities, it's really worth quite a lot. All right, let's look at this. We've got an error. That's because we're still raising this exception here. And so now you can see that signed in is true, which is great. So let's get rid of this line. Restart Spork. And now it should be passing. And there we go. Let's run the full suite. Excellent. Now before moving on, there's one little detail I want to address. Let's take a look back at this and sign out. Now let's access a protected page. Go to /user/1/edit. So it prompts us to sign in as required. Now we sign in. Now think about what you really want the application to do. You click sign in. We were trying to get to this profile edit page, the settings. And yet, after signing in, we just got forwarded to our profile page. Now this is the kind of behavior you'll see on lots of websites out there, but I think this is really stupid. What should happen is that when you try to access a protected page and then you successfully sign in, it should take you to that page. This is a behavior I call friendly forwarding. So let's write a test for this expectation. This is going to be under authorization for non-signed in users. And I'll put this right here. So what do we need to do here? Well, we need to visit a protected page. So let's use the edit user page. Of course, this will now redirect us to the sign-in page, so let's actually fill out the sign-in form. And then after signing in, it should render the protected page that we were trying to visit. In this case, it should be edit user. Let's run that. It's failing as required. So the way this is going to work is in this signed in user filter, we're going to remember where the user is trying to get to. So we need to hoist this up here, unless signed in. We want to remember where they're trying to go. We'll implement that using a method called store location. We're going to have to write this ourselves. This isn't part of Rails, but it's going to be in the sessions helper. Just go to the bottom here. And so this is where you have to know a little bit about the details of Rails. There's a thing called a request object that has the path that we're trying to get to. We can access that in request.fullPath. And we're going to store this in a session variable. And this session works just like a cookie. In particular, it works like a hash, except that it goes away if the user quits the browser. In fact, the session is actually implemented under the hood as a cookie that has a special kind of expiration, namely it expires when the user closes the browser. By the way, you can learn more about the request object by going to the Rails API. Here it is. This is the api.rubyonrails.org, and then the request object, and I went down to action dispatch request. Sometimes it takes a little bit of clicking around to figure out which one of these requests is the thing you're looking for. But here you can see that full path is here on the list, and if we show it, you can see this isn't very helpful. So let's go to our debug. So in addition to debug params, let's just put in debug of request. And now I'm just searching for @fullPath, and you can see that @fullPath is /user/1. So you can learn a lot about the request object by just sticking it in the browser here and looking at the different variables it has. So this is an instance variable @fullPath, and you can get at it by saying request.fullPath. So you can see that we can also get request.method, get the port number, and so on. But because it's so long, I actually don't want to put it in the browser in general, so I'm just going to remove this line. In any case, that's how you get the full path, just request.fullPath. We're storing it in this session, which is a temporary cookie. So in the user's controller, this line here stores the location. And then in the sessions controller, after creating a new session, instead of redirecting to the user's profile page, we should redirect either to the profile page or to the page that they're trying to get to. So we're going to implement that with the method called redirect back or, and then give it a default. So we have to implement this too. So inside of here, we can use the redirect method. And I think it's clearer to put parentheses for a reason that we'll see in a moment. So what we want to do is redirect to this session of return to. That's the variable that we stored. But if this key doesn't exist, then this thing will just be nil, which means we can use the OR operator. So this will redirect to session of return to unless this is nil, in which case it will redirect to default. And I misspelled it there. So let's save everything and rerun the test. Still failing. Oh, these are the wrong things to fill in. It's not name and email. It's email and password. Let's rerun those. Okay, now it's passing. Now if you think about it, there's actually one thing left. Let's take a look at it. Let's sign out. Try to hit the edit page. Sign in. So that's good. The friendly forwarding is working. It forwarded us to the edit page. But what happens if we sign out and sign in again? See, now it's sending us to the edit page again. And that's because we haven't closed down the browser. So this session variable is still remembering where we tried to go. But this is not the right behavior. So after forwarding us to the page we were trying to get to, this redirect back or method should clear the session. We'll write a test for that as follows. So when signing in again, let's have a before block here. Let's click the sign out link. And click sign in. And then let's do the same thing we did here. So this should render the default page, which is the profile, and not the edit page. Remember, the title should have the user's name. So let's run this. Should be failing, which it is. Just look at the error. Good. So it's looking for the right thing, but it's not finding it. So let's go to the sessions helper here. Now if you look at the sign out, cookies has a delete method, which takes the key that you want to delete. As you might guess, session has the same kind of thing. Save that. By the way, you might notice here that the redirect has to happen first, because if we deleted the session, then this here would be nil. But you might wonder, if it's redirecting here, how can it be that this line ever gets run? And let's run the test. We'll see that in fact it is being run. There it is. And the answer is that redirect actually doesn't execute right away. Everything after the redirect is also executed. So this is actually a subtlety that will bite you sometimes. If you happen to redirect and assume that it redirects right away, bad things can happen. So for example, you might redirect if a user is unauthorized, and then have some code that only authorized users are allowed to execute. So in something like a before filter, like in the user's controller, it's important for redirect to be the last thing. It's also the last thing here, because when this if branch executes, redirect to @user is the last thing in that branch. So if you were to put some dangerous method here, this would actually be executed. All right, so that's a minor subtlety. But let's take a look at our full test suite. I think we're probably green. And there we go. Let's check it in the browser. and it worked. But you can see how much time it took to do that, and just imagine testing by hand all of the different things that our tests currently cover. And so you can see that having an automated test suite is extremely valuable. The next thing to do is to make a page to display all users. It's going to be linked from this link in the upper right here. So of course this is stubbed out right now. As part of this process, we're going to actually make this a live link. Let's take a look at a mock-up of what we have in mind. It might seem like making an index page is really simple, but there are a couple of subtleties that are easy to ignore. One of them shows up on this page. We can see that as part of the mock-up we have some links, a previous, 1, 2, 3, next. This is an indication that we're going to be paginating the users. And of course the only reason you would paginate users is if you have too many of them, at least too many to display on a single page. But right now we've only got a few users, the ones we've created by hand. So in the process of making a user index page, we're going to discover that we have too few users, which will lead us to create a large number of sample users, and that in turn will give us the motivation we need to paginate the users in the display on the index page. As part of our design decision, we're going to protect this page so that only logged in users can view the index of all users. Let's start with the test for that. This is in the users controller, so we go to authentication. Actually, this should just be authentication. So describe authentication, authorization in the users controller. We're going to describe visiting the user index. This is the user's path. So the named route for /users is user's path, and that will be routed to the index action. So we visit the user's path, and we expect that we'll be forwarded to the sign-in page. We'll test for that with the title. Let's test that. Oh, that was Shift-Command-E. I want Shift-Command-T. There we go. And the way to get this to pass, let's close these down, is to add index to this list. Let's keep them in standard order. So index comes before edit and update. The standard order is this: index show, new, create, edit, update, destroy. Let's save that and rerun the test. Should be passing. Nope, it's failing. Right, the action index could not be found for users controller. That's true. It's because we don't have an index action. So let's do that. Now we should be passing. Good. Now let's think about the kind of tests we want for this index page. If we go to /users here, we're currently missing the template. So let's write a test that will catch that at the very least. This will be in the user pages spec. And keeping with that standard order, I'm going to put this first. Describe index. And now let's think about what we want. Well, if we look at the mockup, we're going to display each of the users with a link to the profile page, and the linked text will just be the user's name. So let's create a couple of users here in our describe block, and then verify that there's an li, that's to say a list element, containing the user's name. Our first step is to sign in. We can just create a user in this one line. So this creates the user and signs it in. And let's create a couple more users. And then we'll visit the user's path. So let's write a test for that first issue, that there's no template. The title will be all users. Let's run this. It's failing, and so let's look at the index here. Let's create a new file and save it. It's going to go in views, users, index. Provide the title, which is going to be all users. Now it's passing, so if we go to our browser, we should see something here. There we go. It's blank, but this is a good step forward. Let's add an H1 test since we've used that in other cases. Now let's add another test that is going to iterate through all the users and make sure that there's an LI for each user. You may recall that the way to pull out all the users is with user.all. So user.all.each. And then we're going to say that the page should have selector LI. And the user's name is the text. So let's run all of these guys here. Should have a couple failures because we don't have the H1 here either. Let's think about how we're going to do this. We'll save this and rerun the test. We should have just one failure there. Good. Because now the H1 is passing. So let's go in the users controller and think about how we're going to do this. So what we need to do is make a list. Let's make a UL with class users. I just learned that tab trigger, by the way. One of the Rails tutorial readers pointed it out. So we do this, and then for each user, and we're going to have a list element for each one of these users. And from the mockup, we want to have the gravatar. Let's put that in. Turns out in this case we want the size to be 52. This is based on the design of the site. And then let's link to the user. So the link is the user's name, the link text is user's name, and then the actual URL will be the user path of user, but remember we can write that just as user. Save everything and rerun the tests. It might be passing now. There it goes. Let's refresh the browser. So we can see that it's actually working, although it looks terrible. So let's add some CSS. We give it a user's class in anticipation of this problem. So let's put in some rules here. There we go. See how that looks. Looks a lot better. So it's easy enough to add a couple extra tests. Let's just put that in. We can make this test a little more stringent, by the way. If you want to actually test for an anchor tag inside here, we can use this notation. It's just a nesting li, and then inside of that is an a. So this notation is supported by a have selector. So what this will actually test for is the presence of a link with this as the text. Let's run this again. See, that's actually succeeding. It's passing. So let's take a look at this. Let's do this. get rid of this. So this should fail. Yeah, so this is actually testing for a link. There's one more thing to do here before moving on. Let's take a look at all of the changes that will happen when someone signs in. So we've got this profile sign out and settings link that appears. So there's one more link we want to appear. We want the user's link to appear. And we can test the actual href at the same time. Should be user's path, so let's run this. It's failing. Let's go to the application layout, and oh, that's right, it's in the header. So go into the header, and this is our last stubbed out link here, right here. User's path. And rerun the test. Now it should be working. Good. Go to the browser, we refresh. Now if we click on this, well, let's click over here, and then click here. It should give us our list. Good. All right, you can see here that we only have 4 users, but if we want a realistic simulation of what a real site would be like, we should have a lot more than this. Of course, it's really time consuming to enter all of these users by hand. And what's worse, if we ever needed to clear the database, we'd have to redo all that work. So this is a good candidate for automation. And in order to solve this problem, we're going to make a rake task to create sample data for our application. Let's get started here. This is not going to be test driven because it's all just in the browser. So let's start with a new file. Let's save it. And there's a standard location for these kinds of things, for these rake tasks. It's going to be in lib tasks, and then we're going to create something here. We're going to call it sample data.rake. Now this is our first time making a rake file. Rake is actually pure Ruby, but like RSpec, it defines a domain-specific language, or DSL, in this case specialized for defining specific tasks. Let's see how that works. Rake works in terms of namespaces, and we're going to add to a namespace that we've already used lots of times, the DB namespace. So before we've done things like rake DB migrate and rake DB test prepare, we're going to add a task to that namespace. We're going to call it rake DB populate. So let's describe it. That's with the desc method. This is part of rake. And then we define our task, which in this case is populate. And we're going to tell rake that we need the Rails environment, which is indicated with this symbol. And now we can put in the task to populate the database. So in order to do this, you're going to need what's called a faker gem. Again, this is part of the Rails tutorial gem file. Faker lets us create realistic looking names, but we're going to start off with our original example user. I'm just going to create it here. User.createBang is just like create, except it raises an exception if there's a problem. And in this case, we're not going to be using the return value of user.create. So it's nice to have it make a big fuss if there's a problem. It'll alert us to the issue. The name is example user. Email is example@railstutorial.org. So we're just going to create that first user, and then we'll create 99 more so that we have a total of 100. Now you may recall way back in lesson 4, we did something 3 times by doing 3 dot times. In this case, we're just going to do 99 times. The block variable here is just the number. So this is different from what we did before. Before we did just something a certain number of times, and now we see that this times takes an optional block variable. So let's take a look at that at the console. We can do this. But But we can also do this. We can give it a block variable. And you can see that it just counts up from 0. So what we're going to do here is create a bunch of sample users. We're going to use faker to make the name. You can read the faker documentation to see how this works, but it's just faker, and then there's a constant name. This is a class, and then we're going to call the name method on it. Let's see how that works, actually. We're about to see it, but it's nice to see it here. So you can see that faker is loaded as part of the Rails environment. So here are some of the faker names. So those are the kind of names we're going to be creating here. And our email addresses are going to be of this form. I'm going to have example and then a number, and that number is going to be n plus 1. You saw that n started at 0, so I just want to start at 1. And they're all going to be at railstutorial.org. Passwords don't matter. And let's create the user. All right, let's save that. Now the way we invoke this is with rake db populate. And actually, we first want to clear the database. So let's do rake db reset. And now we'll do rake db populate. That takes a while because of the slowness of the bcrypt hashing algorithm. If you ever need to create a really large number of users, it's probably a good idea to change the cost function in development.rb. Remember we did this. In test.rb we changed the default cost. You could put that in development.rb too. But I'm not going to bother with that here. We're not going to be running the sample data all that often. And at this point you need to re-prepare the test database. And now let's take a look at our actual application. See if you can guess what's going to happen here. That's not at all what I thought would happen there. Oh, and this has happened before. It turns out that you also have to restart the server here. In fact, let's just run the console. Let's actually look at the count of the users. Okay, so there are 100 users. So let's try restarting the Rails server. And now when we reload this, it should have all the users. So before when I said, see if you can guess what would happen, this is what I thought would happen. And then I forgot. So this happened because our previous user has been completely blown away. And that means we're no longer signed in. But because we used the same email address and password as we used before, we should be able to sign in with this combination. And there we go. You might also notice our friendly forwarding worked there. Instead of going to /users/1/edit, we actually were going to /users, but because they both use the same protect, you both use the same before filter here. It stored the location and then did the right thing and forwarded us to /users. You'll also note that I've associated the first several email addresses with non-default gravitars. It's in here. That's because I control this domain, railstutorial.org, and so I just associated, say, example-1 at railstutorial.org with this avatar. So going back to /users, we can see that we do have 100 users now, or we're not actually going to count this, but we counted it in the console. There's a problem now, though, which is that we've got too many users. So what we need to do here is paginate them. In order to do this, we're going to use a gem called bootstrap will paginate. This is a modification of the popular will paginate gem to use the pagination features in Bootstrap. Again, this is part of the default Rails tutorial gem file. Let's first get this working, and then we'll write some tests for pagination. Will paginate kind of looks like magic when it works. Let's take a look at it. The way we're going to insert pagination is just like this. And we're going to have pagination above and below the list of users. So what is this doing? Well, what this does is it looks for an instance variable with the same name as the controller. So in this case, the controller is users. So will paginate is going to automatically look for an instance variable called @users. So we can do that here. Let's just replace this. Actually, I want to comment these out for now. Let's just make sure our test suite is still passing. So since we've defined @users, we can do this. Save everything and rerun the test. We should be green. Good. So if we can somehow arrange for this @users to be something other than this user.all, in particular if we can have it be just the first page of users, then we might be able to get pagination to work. So let's get rid of these guys. Let's get them active again. And so this is just the kind of thing you have to read about in the will paginate documentation. But it's very convenient. Will paginate adds a method to the active record class, and that method is paginate, and it takes as an argument a page number, which is going to be passed around as a parameter. So that's going to be params of page. Let's save that and take a look at our actual application here. There we go. So by using Bootstrap will paginate, we automatically use this really nice pagination style. And so this is it. This is already working. We've got pagination working. You can actually click on one of these links, like a direct page number, or you can go previous and next. You can see it's really smart. When you're on the first page, it knows to gray out the previous, and it's no longer a link. This is now a link, and when you get to the last page, now it's grayed out. So this is an incredible amount of functionality right out of the box. Alright, so even though this is working, it's a really good idea to write some tests, if for no other reason than to practice dealing with the large numbers of users. In particular, we're going to need to be able to create a number of users larger than the number of users on a single page, which by default is 30. So if you go to 1 here, if you count these guys up, you'll see that there are 30. And of course, that's incredibly laborious. If you look in here, we don't want to have to create 30 of these by hand. Among other things, all of the email addresses have to be different. So there is a standard solution to this, which is called a sequence. Let's look at that. We're going to go to our factories here. So instead of having this factory user with a hard-coded name and email address, we're going to create a sequence of names and email addresses. That's with the sequence method. And it takes a symbol for the attribute that it's a sequence on. It takes a block with a block variable, which is just the number. And let's pick a name that will be unique. We'll be boring and say person N. And then the email address will just be person_N at example.com. Get rid of this. So let's see how that works in the test for the index. Let's just define our first user. And then we can sign in as that user right here. We're going to get rid of these because now we have a way to create them in bulk. Now it should list each user. Instead of user.all, we're going to just check the first page of users. But in order to do that, we need to be able to create enough users to invoke pagination, which means we need to make at least 30, because we've got 1 here, and we need 31 to invoke pagination. So let's do that here. So 30 times, we'll just create a factory girl user. We'll say user.paginate page 1. Now let's run the test. Good, so it's passing. Let's verify that it's actually the pagination. All right, so we see that all of the users are appearing on the page, but we actually don't have pagination here. We just commented it out. So we need to have a test to catch that too. Now I've gone back and forth on this, on how detailed to make the test, but since it's already working, and since this is an external library, I think it's okay just to do a sanity check. Let's just check for a div. If we go to the browser and look at the source, we can look for the pagination. Actually, we just commented it out. Let's uncomment it. Refresh this. So we can see here, this is what's being put in by will paginate. There's this div class equals pagination. So let's test for that. So it's just div.pagination. So let's comment these guys out. Rerun our tests. All right, it's failing, and now let's see if we pass. Great. Now there's one thing I want you to take a look at. I'm going to run the test one more time. Actually, let's just do these guys here. Notice how long it takes. There's this delay. And the reason for that is this line. We're creating 30 users every time. Now this is truly awful if you don't change the cost function for the bcrypt encryption. That's actually what motivated me to discover the ability to change the cost function for bcrypt. But it's still pretty slow, and there's a way to speed it up. So this before here is actually an alias for before each. This is being run before each test. So these 30 users are being created for every one of these guys, every one of these. There's a way to make this faster. We can create the users before all of these examples. So we just do it once. But if we do that, then we have to have an after all that deletes them. Otherwise, they accumulate in the test database. So we're going to say before all. We're just going to put this in a block. And then after all. Now, you can read about this in Active Record, but Active Record objects have a delete all method. You have to be careful about delete all because sometimes a model will have callbacks that happen when a user is destroyed or when the object is destroyed. This delete all does not invoke those, so it's just one little thing that you need to know about. But it does do the delete in one step, so it's pretty fast. That one I have it misspelled here, after all. There we go. And actually, I want to put this here in the describe block for pagination, because these tests are specific to that. Let's put that there. All right, so now let's try that. Let's get rid of that line here. Now let's run the test here. I'll run the whole test suite, or the whole file. See, it's a lot faster. Let's clean this up a little bit. All right, before moving on, there's one quick thing I want to show you. Go to the console here. I just want to note that, in fact, this will paginate is efficient. So for example, if we look at the third page, this is a whole bunch of stuff that gets done to the screen. But if we look here, we see select users.star from users limit 30 offset 60. So what that means is that it's actually pulling the users out of the database. It's not doing anything stupid like pulling them all into memory and then partitioning them. So the find, this select, actually does happen in the database. So this pagination can scale up to quite a large number of users. All right, now that pagination is working, there's one refactoring that's so nice I just can't resist it. Let's take a look at this LI. If you think about what's inside here, this is essentially one user. So that suggests making a partial for this. Let's cut it. Make a new partial, users, and then we're going to call it underscore user. The name here is important. Let's paste it in. Save it. And so the way we render a partial, remember, is this. We can actually give it an object here. We can pass the user object. Let's run our tests. So render takes an optional hash. It's important to note that this has to be called user because that's the name of the variable in here. But this could be anything. This could be foobar. We could do foobar here. All right, so it turned out there's a shortcut though, because this thing foobar here is of class user. So Rails will actually accept this. We can just say render foobar. Save that and run it. So Rails knows that because this is an object of class user, that it wants to find a partial called underscore user. So that's all implicit. This is one of the examples of Rails's convention over configuration. But you can actually make this even more compact. You can actually call render on @users. So Rails knows that this @users is essentially an array. It's actually not an array. It's the thing that will paginate returns. But as long as you can iterate through it, Rails can handle this with render @users. And each of these @users is of class user. So again, Rails knows to look for a user partial to render it. So let's run the test one more time. All right, this is failing because before we were doing, let's see what we were doing. We were doing this guy, @users.each. But now we're actually putting the render in here, so we need to %equals. And now it's passing. Let's just do a sanity check in the browser. Refresh, and there we've got our pagination. And of course, we can click on these links individually to get to their user profiles. Now it's time to implement the last of the actions for the user's resource. It's this final one. We're going to learn how to destroy users. So we're going to start by creating a special class of administrative users, or admins. The way we'll do this is by adding a Boolean attribute to the user model. Here we see the users table. We have the name, email, password, digest, and remember tokens. They're all strings. And now we've got this admin column, which is a Boolean. So let's go to the user spec, go to the top, and we're going to add another attribute. It should respond to admin. Save that and run it. All right, let's generate a migration. Add admin to users, and we'll say admin Boolean. Let's take a look at the migration. So this says add column to the users table, admin attribute, and it's going to be of type Boolean. We actually want to add a default value. By default it's nil, but we really want it to be false. It probably doesn't matter, but conceivably there are some database adapters out there that do something weird with add column. And at the very least, we want to express our clear intent that users are not admins by default. So let's save that and run the migration. And we can rerun our tests. We need to prepare the test database. There we go. Now let's see what this admin column gets us. Just pull the first user out of the database. Let's see if the first user is an admin. False. So you can see that the presence of a Boolean column in the database causes Rails to automatically synthesize an admin question mark method here. Rails also supplies a method called toggle bang. The bang indicates that we're mutating the user, and we can give it an attribute. And what this does is it toggles that attribute from false to true or vice versa. So if we go up to user.admin question mark, now it's true. Following the rspec Boolean convention, that means that we can test that the default user is not an admin, like this. It should not be admin. We would like to have an administrative user, though, by default. So let's go to our sample data. And let's make this first user an admin. Let's assign this to a variable. And then say admin.toggleBang. Save that, and let's just do our three things here. Rake DB reset, rake DB populate, you can see that in the shell here I can do semicolons just like in Ruby. We use toggle bang here to change the admin attribute, but you may wonder, why didn't we just pass admin as true here? Or maybe admin is 1. And the answer is because that won't work, and the reason it won't work is really important, so let's take a look at it. The reason it won't work is because if we look in the user model, admin is not one of these accessible attributes. So if we were to add admin to this, or even worse, if we were just to comment this out, now anybody posting to this create, or if they were to update, including admin as 1, they would be able to turn themselves into an administrative user. So it's absolutely essential that admin not appear on this @accessible list. In fact, it's important enough that I'm going to write a test for it. It's going to be right at the top here. It should not allow access to admin. Remember, access in this context refers to mass assignment. And if we try to do that, let's take a look at it. So you can see here, if we try to assign to this through mass assignment, that is to say using this hash, we get an active model mass assignment security error. So we actually want to test for that. We can wrap this in an expect block. We're going to say user.new admin1 should raise error, and then the name of the error. So let's add admin to this list to get this test to fail. This is pretty advanced, but this is so important to get the security right. So let's just run this one example. It should be failing, and now if we remove admin, it should pass. So now it should be raising that error. Yep, so now it's passing. Let's rerun the whole thing. Great. All right, let's take a look at a mock-up of what we want to accomplish in the rest of this lesson. So this is a mock-up of the user's index, except now we've got delete links. So we're going to add delete links just for admin users. And of course, we're going to have to control access at the action level as well. But these delete links should only appear for admin users, and only admins should be able to destroy users. So in this context, it's going to be useful to be able to make an admin inside the factory. So we can actually add a block inside here. And we can create an admin user here just by saying admin true. You'll note here that factory girl is not bound by the rules of the @accessible. So this will allow us to create a factory using factory_girl.create admin instead of user. And what's good about that is that we'll be able to create a user with administrative capabilities without using toggle bang every time. All right, let's go to the test for the user index. After pagination here, let's have a section on as an admin user. Actually, let's talk about the delete links. Describe delete links. By default, we don't want any delete links to appear. But admin users should see them. the admin symbol to create an admin. We need to sign in as that admin. And visit the user's path. So now it should have a link. And it should be to the first user. That's one of the delete links that should appear. So let's run that test. It should fail. Oops, I did Shift Command E again. Do Shift Command T. This should fail. It ran the user spec there, which was passing. Okay, so let's put in that link. It's going to be in this partial here. So we're going to say if the current user is an admin, I'm going to put in a little vertical bar and make a link. Let's just stub it out for now. Just enough to get it to pass. Nope, still failing. Well, actually, we do need the user, don't we? So here we are. Let's just put the whole thing in. We're going to give it a method, which is delete. And we're just going to add a confirmation box. This gets skipped in the test because it's only invoked if you use JavaScript. Right, so this should pass. Nope, still failing. Ah, it's a Spork issue. There we go. And let's actually look in the browser. Remember, we redid the population. So this is great. Look at this. We've got delete links for all these guys. Now, there is one problem, though. You'll note the example user has a delete link, but it's a really good idea not to let people delete themselves. So we'll enforce that at the view layer right now just by not showing the delete link to the current user. So inside of this partial, there's a user variable. You can see here. By the way, you may have wondered how that happened. It just happens automatically. But now you can see that it omits the delete link. It's nice to restrict that at a lower level as well, so that it's impossible for admins to delete themselves. And that's left as an exercise. All right, so what do we want this link to actually do? Well, if we click it, we want it to lower the number of users in the database by 1. So this admin should be able to delete another user. So we expect click link to delete to change user count. Remember this from the sign up test. By, well, let's take a look at this. We can actually open up the user pages spec over here. This is useful when you want to look at a different part of the same file. So remember, when we wanted to create a user, we did expect click button submit to change user count by 1. Here, we expect click link delete to change user count by -1. So let's run that. It should definitely be failing. All right, now clicking this delete link gets routed to the destroy action. Let's take a look at that. So this is the confirmation. We're going to say OK. But then it says the action destroy could not be found. That's true. There is no destroy action right now. But this is the last one. So what we're going to do here is we're going to find the user and then destroy it. And there's a destroy method for that. We saw way back in lesson 4. And we can put this in one line just by saying user.find.destroy. So we'll say user destroyed in the flash message, and then we'll just redirect back to the user's path. Writing tests for these things is left as an exercise as well. And actually, it's a really good idea to test that this link isn't there for the admin. All right, so let's go back here and reload the page. Let's delete the first user that doesn't have a gravatar. Prints Casson, sorry, price Casson. And there we go. Now that user's gone. And we've got this useful flash message, user destroyed. Now, of course, this isn't remotely enough security. While it's true that the delete links don't appear, anybody using a command line client that can issue delete requests could actually delete any user in the database. So we need to prevent that from happening. Let's go to the authentication page's spec. This falls under authorization. Let's put a block down here for non-admin users. So let's create a couple users, one that's explicitly not an admin. Actually, neither of them is an admin, but it only matters for the second one. So let's sign in as that non-admin. And now what we're going to say is that if we submit a delete request directly to the destroy action, that it should redirect to the root path. So remember, before we used the put method, now we're going to use the delete method. This submits the delete request directly. Looking at this table, we can see that we need to issue the delete request to the user path of the user, which is, this can be something like /user/1. And then this should be redirected. The response. Save that, and let's run these tests here. We should have one failure. So we need one more filter here. If there's only one, we can just do like this. We don't have to have it in an array. Now let's make that filter. And what we're going to do is redirect unless the current user is an admin. Remember, there's a Boolean for that. And see if we can get this to pass. And there we go. All right, this essentially brings us to the end of the user model. We've now filled in all of the canonical REST actions, as shown here. In the final two lessons, we'll add a couple more models to our application and learn how to use some of Rails's data modeling capabilities. But what we have here is the foundation of lots of different kinds of websites. We can let users sign up to our application, and then those users can sign in and sign out, and it can also edit their information. Let's commit the results and push them up to Heroku. All right, let's load the production database with our sample data. This is how you do that. Now, we actually have to give it our application name, but it will tell us what it is if we don't give it. Yeah, so it's Blooming Ice 2571 in my case. Do this, confirm, and then the name of the database, or the name of the app rather. And now let's run the migration. And let's run the populate task. And finally, let's open the application. Let's go to /users, watch our friendly forwarding in action. So I signed in as myself before, but now it's a sample user. And there we go. I actually want to change my password here so that I'm the only one who can change this. Let's do that. The sample app can now serve as a base for virtually any kind of web application, and it's live on the web.